Let's hear it from Mr. Sanjay Kumar today, who's presenting on ensuring customer success, fail fast, and fail often. Sanjay is heading and leading a development at ITC Infotech. Prior to his current role, he was heading the domain and solutions group for BFSI practice at ITC Infotech. He has over 25 years of experience in information technology and operations across retail banking, insurance, wealth management, and trading systems. Welcome, Mr. Sanjay.
Thank you. Good morning. So we are still waiting for people to trickle in, and we decided let's start, and that hopefully is a trigger for people to walk in. When we start talking about customer, I'm taking an approach which is not looked at kindly in the organizations. Failure is considered as 2 steps back. But how do we look at from that perspective? And here I'm talking about failing multiple times. One of the triggers for me to talk about this side of activities was when we bring our BAs up to speed within the organization. A simplest of the activity we are doing is make sure how many times can you find creative ways to fail within the training class, with the hope that when you are in a project in front of a customer, you have worked out a lot of the failure points out of your system and figured out ways around it. That is also a perspective to look at from what is the value of failure. Now, if I had to ask a quick raise of hands, how many of you would consider that you had a major failure in your life till now on one aspect of other? Professional. How many of you felt that that pegged you back 2 steps? You recovered out of it. Looking at the people, yes, quite a few of you. I'm looking at you also, so you recovered out of it. That is one of the biggest items of human perspective. We, as a species, have a level of resilience to recover out of danger, to recover out of failures, and that is one of the things which I'm looking at leveraging from within our environments. So, when we start talking about failure, the challenge comes, should it become something which becomes a habit? You fail often, has failure become a part of us? And that is the danger point which I look at from a perspective of when we start talking about failures. The only condition I set for my teams, you will not repeat a failure. You have taken your learning from the failure, you will not repeat a failure. You find out inventive ways of failing, I'm more than happy. Why? Each of those ways of failing has thrown up a risk which we have within our process, within our system. We have not detected it, so as a result, there's a failure point which has come up. Good enough. Let's take our learnings, move ahead. Let's not repeat it. And that is a critical item to look at from a failure perspective. Now let me go towards the second part of it, which is when we are talking customer success, who is it that we are talking about? Both the prior sessions, if you had heard what Ramesh was saying in the morning, and also what the UST Global session was around the telemedicine, how do you identify the customer? Who's the customer? I will end up having a lot of internal customers. I will end up having my clients as customers. Now, in UST Global telemedicine side, the end customer was also a customer. And today, the way the technology is, we are reaching out more and more frequently to those end customers. We need to understand their thought process. We need to look at it from their perspective. And that has become an added challenge. How do I project myself into the mindset they might have? Not easy always. There are some aspects. Why do we look at client success from that side? When my client's customer is happy, the client will consider the things as a success, and automatically that will rub off. I'm adding another dimension now towards that. I'm not only looking at the client's customers, I also start looking at the client's partners. Nobody today works in isolation. So it is the two-pronged perspective which the client starts carrying. Are my customers happy? Am I making it easier also for my partners or my vendors to service me, to provide support to me, so that I can further make my customers happy? So I'm adding that additional dimension for us to look at from a perspective of what is the target audience we are looking at. And the critical part is, these are the two places of the target audience. Too many times, my client can't even give the mindset of their own customers. So there is always a challenge which is going to go on in terms of us trying to play that role, us trying to understand their mindset. And to make sure the client is happy, we have to focus on to these two. We start talking about various ways. I'm going to focus today on to two different aspects. One of that is towards prototyping. And I'm not talking traditional prototyping. Over the last 4-5 years, there's been a huge change in terms of how prototyping has been looked at. I'm talking about a mix of the two. What was the earlier perspective of prototyping? What are the new ways of prototyping? Not only that, what does it deliver to us? So this is one aspect of the area which I'm going to talk about. Do I understand what is the requirements which I'm gathering are supposed to do? Do I understand the nuances around that? Do I understand what is supposed to deliver? Remember, I talked about, can I get into the mindset of my client's client or my client's partners? This is one of the areas which the prototyping helps me. I start understanding a little bit from their perspective. What is it that they are going to look at? What is it that they are going to feel? So this is only an exploration for me to build up my mind. What is happening? How is it happening? Process maps, very accurate. But process maps, please also understand, are a tool which is devoid totally of any feeling. The feeling part of it is something which we have to look at. When an individual interacts with the process, what is it that they are looking at? What is it that they are feeling? So this helps us get into that mindset. We try something, more ideas come to mind. Try a different approach, different ideas come to mind. The need the customer might have given us, that this is my need. I'm not even going to the requirement stage. This is my need. These are my requirements which are at a high level. Can I service the same thing far more efficient way? So one side is, can I trigger some of those ideas, look at some of those options? Second side is, before I start investing a lot of time, lot of money into actually creating that solution, can I test it out at a very basic level? Can I test it out with some sample users? Can I test it out with some people? And I will come about to how other than physical products are being tested today. You will be, you are familiar with those, whether it's explicitly something you can call out, I don't know. So I'm talking about one or two of those approaches also. But this helps me test out and validate what is being created. Is it actually going to service that need? Lastly, my client gave me the need, my client gave me the high-level requirements. How do I sell a slight variant back to the client? Well, this was your need. Do you want to test it out? Here's a quick view of that. Getting that mindset change from the earlier thought process that this is the way I want things done, you need to trigger certain variants for them. That it handles the same thing, This handles one way, this handles a different way, this is a third different option. When you display it through a prototype, believe me, it makes a lot of difference. It makes a lot of difference in terms of convincing the client. So the basic question which actually starts off for me when I'm going to talk further is around these three aspects. But this is also something which we as business analysts tend to ignore too often. This is the need which is given. These are the requirements which have been talked about. I have to stick to that. Well, guess what? When we start sticking to that right to the last word, and I'm talking also of when I start drawing out a process map very exact, I have lost out an opportunity to bring about a change. At the bare minimum, as business analysts, as specialists, we have different ideas, always. Could this be done something better? Yes, it could be done. Could it be done in a different form? Always we tend to pull ourselves back. That my client is not going to like that change. How do I put it across to the client? This is one of the ways to start looking at putting it across to the client, is to talk about, this is what you wanted, these are two different variations around it. Do you want to look at the perspectives into that? I have given the client their exact requirement as a small prototype, visual perspective, touch and feel perspective at times. I have also given slight different variants. What have I done? I have, without dictating to the client, started giving them options in a far better way for them to start evaluating. That's a side factor. If the contract is already signed, guess what? Your managers are going to be happy because that's a variation which has to be signed off and it means revenue. Forget about that side. But what is it that we are putting across? We are putting across our thought process in addition to the client's process or client's perspective to create something which is far better than what was initially thought through. Because we are living a journey. We are adding different perspectives. As we walk through the steps, different ideas come. So let's focus on to some of those aspects. When we start looking at what is it that we want to look at from a prototyping perspective, there's a different approach which has to be looked at if it's an internal user, which is automatically a small group, finite group, versus an external user. More and more of our perspectives are coming out through a very large body whom we are exposing these items to. The approaches have to be used slightly differently. You have to identify who's it meant for. Do the things early. If there's a failure point, if there are corrections which have to be done based on to what we are talking about is a visual or a physical touch and feel, let's do it early enough. Remember, one of the things which has always been a tough item is how do you define the adequacy of the requirements which we have gathered. This is one of the ways which helps us to get out those errors, get out those challenge areas a little bit out of the way, not 100%, but even if we start hitting 50 to 60%, that's better than nothing at all, of those late discoveries. So if we prepone those 50 to 60% of the late discoveries, guess what? Our projects are more compact. Our projects are more effective. The cost is also contained. That's from the internal customer side. The end customer starts looking at they're going to get it faster. Makes a lot of difference. Can we include those? Can we include their variants? Can we do these discoveries ahead of time? Now I have a simple question, because the next item talks about that. How many of you have referred to a user manual in the last 2 months or 3 months? Let me expand it. In the last 1 year? Few hands. Were we ever taught on how to use a specific app on our mobile phones? What has changed? User manuals have become junk. Why? We have started looking more and more closely at to how do people intuitively pick up those things? The user experience, the user perspective starts becoming very important. Prototypes help us look at some of that. One of the elements which I've really enjoyed exploring onto the design thinking side of it into real life was to start looking at hand over a prototype to a user. Not only do you start looking at no instructions given to the user, how does the user handle that prototype? Can the user work out what are the steps to be taken to utilize that? Becomes easier. If it's not easy for the user and the user is requiring instructions, maybe I need to look at going back and figuring out what is the interface which is there. What is the level of intuition which is going in versus the level of explicit instruction. A lot of the works areas which we are doing, we can harness technology to make it simple for the end user and leave out a lot of the convoluted thinking to technology. Last year, I was talking also about the challenges which were around design of a racing cycle versus for common use. Actually goes back down to that same thing. Too many controls in a racing cycle, people are not apt to use it for a weekend ride or a weekend casual use. Make it simple. This is where it starts becoming important that we need to look at how are they going to handle it, how are they going to perceive the usage of it. I talked about how do we convince the customer using the prototypes onto slight variations. What are you doing? You're preceding or pre-displaying a certain idea in a safe environment and not in a production environment to an independent user or to my end user. This is what you wanted, or this is what is expected. These are the slight variants. All of a sudden, you've started using some techniques which are used actively in consulting, and focus on the word consulting, where you talk about those ideas before putting it down in a report to some of the influential users. You're getting them used to the idea of something different. You're getting them used to the idea that this is something which is feasible, these are the changes which have to be done. When it's presented formally, guess what? You will see most of them nodding their head because they have been exposed to those kind of ideas. And this is a standard technique which is used across consulting onto that. I'm just borrowing it from that side into our activities. How do you create visual impact? If it's a technology product, believe it or not, some of the easy prototypes which I have been able to achieve, simple HTML, simple PowerPoint, and I'm actually borrowing the next two slides from some work which I had done some 6 years back. So it was true even then. We were creating a set of dashboards for a prospect, put up the dashboards, hyperlinked it from one link to another link. The way you would work on a dashboard, you click on one side, it takes you to the next slide. You can always come back to home. You can move to some other areas. So if you keep moving between home and to those sides, guess what? The client starts getting a feel for, yes, this is something which is intuitive for me. This is something which is giving me a visual perspective. I can trace down 2 more steps and I have the entire set of information. Dashboards since then, now keep in mind this is something which is 6 years old. Dashboards since then have become far more sophisticated. I just borrowed the slides for the speed of putting together the items. But this is how intuitive things are becoming. It's a visual touch. My client starts getting a feel for what is it that they're going to face off to on a daily life. What is it that will give them a visual perspective? If you look at from the perspective, different forms. So the client gets exposed to also picking and choosing. On this kind of information, I would prefer it to be presented this way. Can I link this information from that information? Can I combine the two? Different structures start coming out. It starts creating those ideas for the client also to start generating new ideas for them. Remember, that was one of the items which we wanted to do through the prototype perspective. How many of you have heard of this product? From Unilever. This is one of the disaster stories actually for Unilever. They wanted to create a detergent which would clean the clothes. Small pack, clean the clothes, powerful enough. Unfortunately, it cleaned the clothes too well. It cleaned out the fibers also in a lot of cases. This became a disaster story for Unilever. Small, created a mighty problem for Unilever. They actually withdrew out the product. Since then, they have launched variants of this product. In case you want to see what is the kind of equivalence, the same background logo is used in Surf Excel also. But the original launch of this was Persil. And this was challenge. Can you imagine what would have happened if I had done that kind of a prototype? And in US, I have seen it's a standard practice. You create a new product, especially if it's a consumer product, along with the newspaper, it'll be stuck onto the pages of the newspaper. Samples will come out as part of those packages. People can try it. People can give their perspective. Since then, the items have changed. Technology is being harnessed to also collect feedback onto that. But prototyping and free samples combined together is one of the ways which actually generates a lot of the perspective for early test, getting out those challenges out of the way. If you can imagine what was the cost for Unilever to create a product, market it out, and a few months later withdraw out the entire product out of the market. Huge amount of cost. What is that? Come on, guys. iPhone, one of the earlier variants. Remember what they did. Before they launched, there was no concept of a smartphone. Today, we cannot survive without a smartphone. We want control on our hands. So what they brought about was something different. Ramesh talked about it in the morning. WhatsApp. I'm going to talk about very different things about both these areas. One is the phone side or the handheld device side. Second is a software product side. They are famous for their customer experience. Let me ask you another thing. Can you figure out one or two more ways what they are famous for? Brand image, how do you have created that? Customer experience. To reach that level of customer experience has taken a lot of work. How do they test those concepts? They are also known for selectively these days leaking their specs. You have heard about specs being leaked onto pretty much every new phone launch ahead of time. WhatsApp has been running literally so many different changes onto their platform. Small snippets of it have been leaked out, always. Already creating hype, expectation. You're creating a customer affinity based on the expectation itself. So what are you doing? You don't even have a prototype. It's a pseudo prototype. And you've started collecting some perspectives of feedback. The channels which have been used, a lot of us comment onto those leaked specs, expressing our opinions. Can you imagine the reach of those comments and the value of those comments to these organizations? What is it that they're doing? They're doing a mass scale testing through the leakage of those comments. Those specs do not leak out that easily. The frequency with which we have seen those leaks are not accidents. Sorry, that is my belief. People could differ, but my belief is enough of those specs are leaked out deliberately. Data which comes out of that. Fantastic amount of data and information which is coming out of that. Look at how people react. What is the fraction of people who have liked the feel? What is the fraction of people who are looking forward to that kind of a feature? How do people compare it to a competitive product? They have already launched it. This is something which has been desperately we are looking for, and I have already shifted my platforms. These kind of comments do come in. Lowest risk. If a leak specs bombs. Sorry, that was one of the areas we were looking at. Because the way we tested it, it did not come out well, we decided not to include that spec. Early discovery of a challenge zone based on those feedbacks. And what is the cost of getting that feedback? Nothing. Literally nothing. This is the lowest cost into a mass scale product perspective to get feedback, run a prototype by people. Sorry, this was not, how many of you ever thought that I will be talking about leak specs in terms of testing? Last item. Too many times we keep wearing our professional hats too strongly. Today all of us are sitting here wearing our professional hats. Why do we forget for a lot of the areas? We also are a potential consumer. Let's put on our personal hats. Let's evaluate from that perspective also, which automatically means I am not looking at any level of a design or an output purely based on what are the specs which are given to me. I'm asking the most challenging of the activities is to go and confront my end client with new thoughts. Well, let me put on my personal hat. Let me assume I am experiencing this activity. And if I can experience that activity, what is it that I would like more? What is it that I would like less of? Now, those elements start making a lot of difference. It also gives me an ability to look at things very differently, to explore my own feelings with that kind of a product structure. When we start talking design thinking side of activities, we start talking about empathy and creating empathy. Let's also understand, for a lot of these items, I can create that empathy using my own feelings. Awareness in terms of me being a consumer. So if I had to look at combining together how early can I do a discovery of two different items? What could be the variations which will make it useful of any particular requirement set? What could be the challenges in that requirement set which could lead to further downstream risk, some of which we can preempt? Nothing better than that. Can I get the early refinements done? Working with some of the prototypes, whether visual prototypes or physical prototypes, both create a very major difference. It makes a lot of difference in terms of getting those challenges, getting those ideas flowing, both ends of it, into the final end product. If we start doing it at too late a stage where some tests are being run but the entire product design has already been formulated, everything done, the amount of rework which will be required is too high. Prototyping does help in that. Generate a buy-in. Whether I am displaying a prototype to my client, whether we are leaking the specs, we are breaking down that resistance to change. we are creating a buy-in, we are creating a hype, we are creating a set of expectations. Now keep in mind one thing, this is a double-edged sword. When you display a refined prototype, you are expected to deliver that. So what you display should be able to deliver that. What you are promising as part of that prototype, we have to carry that through towards a delivery point. It also helps in terms of speed. I'm eliminating a lot of errors downstream to actually compress the entire project cycle. I'm bringing a lot of the discovery activities to an early stage. If I can bring a decent amount of activities to the early stage, that early stage will expand a little bit. But the rest of the activities, with the buy-in created, with a visual perspective, with a kind of a mindset already generated, the rest of the activities become far faster. And some of those common areas could still be carried out while this ideation is going on. They start making a difference in terms of what is presented as an end product, what is the acceptance of that end product, not only at my client side, but at my client's client side. Getting a cross-section of the people to be exposed to that starts creating that kind of a feeling, yes, I'm familiar with that. This is something I can work with easily. This is something which will help me onto that. You're already seeding some thoughts. You're already setting those expectations. The rollout becomes smoother. And believe it or not, our clients are going to look at those perspectives. What is the feedback they're getting after the launch? The biggest challenge in that, the biggest risk in that is setting a certain set of expectations and not being able to match it up with the final product. Be wary of that side. But these elements can start making a lot of difference towards creating that early success, creating that feeling that yes, it's a positive launch, it's something which has worked wonders, it's made life easier, it's made life that much more expanded in terms of experiences. Look at it from that perspective. That is what is the customer success side of activities. Queries, questions from folks? Bring out your failures right up to the early stage.
Hello?
Yeah.
So you talked about one of the ways of prototype essential is to identify who is the target, internal versus external.
Yes.
So keeping the client's mindset in mind, how can we identify the right target for which we might be building the prototype?
When I'm saying internal versus external, I'm saying is what I'm doing, is it for consumption within the organization? By that I mean within the client's organization. Or is it for consumption by general public on behalf of my client? The two sets are distinctly different because one is a finite set. I can create different viewpoints, different customer stories, different prototypes to establish their perspectives onto what they will be exposed to. Easily done, finite, limited exposure, far faster room for changes to be brought in. When I'm reaching out to the general public on behalf of the client, that testing is never going to be easy on any prototype. Focus groups are there, leaked specs are there. Sorry, I'm continuing to use those words, but those are probably the practical ways of getting feedback. The feedbacks come from comments. The feedbacks today, I don't believe in those formal feedback forms. They have become useless. They are the yes, no, or grade activities. They do not bring out the feeling which a person had while getting exposed to something new, something different. That testing using prototypes is a little bit tougher. It requires far better design in terms of what aspects need to be tested, how they should be tested. Should you expose it to in a closed environment? Do you want to expose that thing in an open environment for people to give open comments? That is a very tough feedback design which is happening. That is one of the things which I was talking about. That is where the internal versus external customer perspective has to be carried. The external here is general public. External is in terms of large numbers which I cannot quantify. External is with demographics which I might never be exact in terms of the variety across demographics. One, two. Sorry, there's one more question in the back.
Yeah. I just want to know what exactly is the correct time in a customer negotiation process when you should share the prototype with the customer. For example, we might have done some work related to a similar kind of problem that the new customer brings in. But at the first stage of the negotiation, is it a good idea to share your prototype? Because if that negotiation doesn't successfully, translate into winning a project, there is a possibility that I'm giving out my, best practices to the client for their utilization?
I think one of the ways which I had to personally address that kind of a thing was to display it, give them glimpses, and take it away. When I showed you that prototype of a dashboard, I probably ran 3 different sessions for different people in the client side using WebEx, told them very clearly, this is not a set which I'm ever going to mail across to you. A lot of thought has gone into it. However, if you want me to run this for 5 other people, I will run it again and again. I will run enough WebExes. So there is a fine line which is there, and we will never realize when we are doing ourselves a disservice also. The way I look at it, one, give them a glimpse, start getting their thoughts also getting better realized and expressed. The second item is, can I walk away creating a positive thought that yes, this is somebody or this is a group which has done something similar to what we need. They might be in a better position to deliver what we need. And they have given me a level of confidence by showing actually what has been done. Otherwise, the theory versus actual practice is going to continue being a challenge, and what we are trying to do is create that positive impression. You give a glimpse, it creates a level of confidence. You don't ever get down to giving a detailed glimpse. That is where it starts becoming counterproductive, because the thoughts and the IPs are never expressed as explicitly, so we can be in the danger of that. Hang on. There are 2 questions here. I will come back to you guys also.
Hello. Thank you for the great presentation, firstly. My question is that if we are talking about a new product where we need the customer to adapt to to move forward in terms of technology. For example, if I say when net banking came, a generation above us, before us, may not be that comfortable in sharing their banking credentials online. They were very skeptical if that gets, forged or something. So in that case, in case of new product where customer learning and adaptation is very important, is this kind of early testing or leaking a bit of the products, whatever feedback we get, can we still consider those feedback? Because the adapting phase of the customer in this case is a little longer.
There are 2 perspectives. To do a leakage of such items might not be tough. You can leak add-on information. You can leak add-on features to something which is already existing. So it's easy for people to correlate quickly to it and be able to comment effectively. Here, for a totally new product, you might have to do an experience center, you might have to do a focus group in person. That kind of activity, whether there is expression of or a perception of risk because my information might get leaked, is one of the items to look out for. Because what are they saying? They are talking about the mindset of the people who are going to be the end users. It's not necessary only to counter that through the product design. It is also in some areas countered by what is the kind of marketing campaign I need to run. Do I keep emphasizing on to the security aspect and put to rest some of those? Do I need to create a simple insurance perspective? Guys, if your credentials are stolen because of X, Y, and Z reasons, we will take liability onto that. I can take that insurance and put it back to my insurer. That's a cost of doing business. But that becomes an effective marketing campaign perspective and a product extension perspective. Because if I'm providing an assurance to my customer and backing it up by insurance, that's a huge statement of confidence from my side.
Thank you.
Hi, Sanjay. Hey, thanks for the wonderful presentation on using prototyping for requirements. And looks like there are a lot of people liking your leaked specs take on it. I have a question on, from a BA perspective, when you do prototyping and you take prototyping to clients, one of the fears, we have grown up with this fact that get it right the first time. But here you're bringing prototyping to fail early, fail often, but don't take it to later on the cycle. So there's a big mind shift in terms of taking an unfinished product to a client, and then how are you going to be valued? How are you going to be recognized? What expectation does it set? So as a BA, you give us your thoughts on how to sort of get out of the old mindset.
I think that has got to be, even before I take prototyping, I need to drop certain thoughts there. I'm going to bring some rough views of that to gauge your reaction, to get your inputs onto what could be done better. It will help us refine it. Second aspect, which becomes a little bit tougher, but it's also now getting used more effectively. I've seen that happening in 2 or 3 instances fairly actively. Create not just one prototype. The first prototype which we create generates more ideas. Don't discard the first prototype, that's the roughest of the one. Create 2 or 3 more refined versions. Take all the 3 versions. Guess what happens? This was one prototype we created. This is the second one. This is the third one. What are you doing? You're countering the mindset of my customer in terms of looking at an unfinished product. Yes, these guys are thinking. They did this, which set a baseline, which was my roughest prototype. They've done better. They have done even better. They have looked at different aspects. They are thinking through things. We have to do a pre-mindset onto that. So it requires a little bit work extra at that time to think through how do I take it to the customer and expose it. At the same time, never go with a single prototype. Go with different variants on that. It makes a difference. This is what the work has to be done up front. If I have to fail, I want to fail with one prototype, not with all the prototypes. I want to use some of those prototypes to refine it further. And I've seen this happening now in the more recent past onto that.
I think there was a question up there.
Okay.
One there, one here. So variants around that, we have to deal with that uncertainty always.
I have just a small question that let us suppose there is a new product or a service in the market, and there are, let's say, 100 customers of that product or service. So there will be always 20 or 10 customers who will never respond what they felt about the product or the service. So what would be the providers or the company's approach towards, actually I should call it as, what is the trick that they can actually involve these customers also into the product improvement process?
Part of that is also in terms of, one, Be wary of bugging that person too much who does not want to respond. 2, if I have to bug them twice or thrice, can I add that with a small incentive? That if we see your response quickly, this is what you will end up gaining onto that. We value your this thing. Work on the ego side also. Those are some of the items which have to work. The last item in that, if you're actually doing a focus group or a small in-person this thing, while people might not write certain things, people's body language speaks a lot. Look out for that body language. Look at how they reacted to it. What is the walk when they're moving away from that focus group? What is the walk and their stance when they're talking to somebody else in the focus group? Is it aggressive? Is it mild? Is it relaxed? Those aspects speak a lot. It's the non-verbal side of it which starts making a difference.
Thank you so much for the great presentation, first of all. I wanted to ask about the training part. So you put up a slide where you said user manuals are obsolete and everything. Quite agreed. But there are many like specific softwares that we develop for a certain user group. How do you think user training cycle can be shortened, and whether it is advisable, like how much stress should be given on making it more and more intuitive, and maybe, lessen the chaos, or you may say the complexity of the software. So what should be the trade-off?
I think we are moving more and more aggressively towards an area where, unless and until it requires an explicit human mind-based decision making, rest of the steps can be converted to very intuitive steps to move ahead. Information has to be entered as long as it allows me to flow into that. How do I move from one screen to next screen? As long as that is visible, starts making a difference. These are items which can be done intuitively. Where it requires explicit human thought process is where I need to train the people. Today, newer technologies are coming which are also taking a part of that step. When we talk about machine learning, when we talk about the artificial intelligence side of activities, those are taking hold. So there are ways where the human mind thought is being channeled to how I would like to move it logically. Not exact, still progress, under progress, and there might be areas where I still need to give a user manual. Can I walk away from how many of those user manuals is the question?
I just also had a comment about, so we deal with these problems day to day.
Mm-hmm.
So consistency is also something that we build on. Like, so in a big product, we try to maintain the consistency. So some of the problem statements that we solved initially might, we might be able to live with certain design. And then we will go into more complexity, and in order to maintain the consistency or you can say baggage of what we have already delivered, we kind of keep building on it. So, I mean, it becomes a vicious circle at the end, wherein you just keep on building on something which you have already done.
I will tell you the prime example of that. I don't want to answer that. I have to give it some thought, but I will give you the prime example. All our organizations, our base technology products, we keep doing add-on. Our maintenance costs keep on going up. Do we ever look at rationalizing that entire setup, which will make my next 6 months really overworked, overcost? The 2 years after that, I recover back that. Those are some of the thoughts. There is how do I prevent that? As yet, I need to give it some decent thought before I can do that. I'm very conscious of the time. I can answer one more question before I have to close, and the next set is also waiting.
Hi, thank you so much for the session. Just wanted to know your views on how fancy should a prototype be. Because I remember like 4 or 5 years back, even a plain sketch of a screen and some great buttons would wow the customers. Now the customers are more, they have used so many products, they understand the intuitiveness of a product. So they usually in the discovery, they will ask, okay, where is the final design? Or what you see is what you get. So off lately, in last couple of years, I've been taking my UX designer also in the discoveries. So I just wanted to know your thoughts.
Important.
Yeah.
It is important. Today, when you look at from a customer visual design perspective, there are a lot of specialists who actually work around those areas also, where they create different color schema. Slight changes into the layout, slight changes into the kind of font which is being used. And those could be created as, let's take this screen and we will show you 10 different variants. Or we insert them one after other after some delay and see the reaction. Beyond just the explicit, the implicit responses do keep in mind that makes a difference. What are we doing? We are telling our customer also, we want you involved into the final decision making. We can read your mind only to this level. We need your explicit input onto that. That makes a lot of difference. You're creating that involvement from their side into the thought process. And a lot of the people who work with the control environments, they like that. This is the finished product, it's a prescribed product. No, this is where we want your opinion, this is where you want your opinion. It could be a short session, but it creates that involvement. Okay?
Sure, thanks.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sanjay. And in case you had more questions, please connect with Sanjay in your breaks.